The Nevada Air Base shimmered under the merciless desert sun, its concrete runways radiating heat waves that made the horizon dance like a mirage. Staff Sergeant Rachel Martinez stood at her radar console, clipboard in hand, watching the screen. With the same focused attention she'd given it every day for the past 3 years. The polished F-35s and F-22s gleamed on the flight line like expensive toys, their crews laughing and posturing around them with the easy confidence of people who'd never been questioned. Rachel's uniform bore the faded patches of someone who actually worked for a living. Her boots were scuffed, her name tape slightly frayed at the edges. She'd learned long ago that in a world of shiny jets and shinier egos, a radar technician might as well be invisible, which was exactly how she preferred it. Martinez. The voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Major Kevin Thompson strode across the tarmac, his flight suit immaculate, his swagger practiced to perfection. Behind him trailed his usual crew of junior pilots, all hungry grins and designer sunglasses. Thompson had been the golden boy of the squadron since his arrival 6 months ago. Harvard MBA turned fighter pilot, the kind of man who collected achievements like poker chips. Rachel straightened, setting down her clipboard. "Yes, sir?" Thompson's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "I need you to run a full diagnostic on the radar array. Command's breathing down my neck about response times, and I can't have any technical difficulties ... slowing us down." She nodded, making a note. "I ran diagnostics yesterday, sir. Everything's operating within normal parameters. But I did notice some unusual. Did I ask for your analysis, Martinez?" Thompson's voice carried that particular tone she'd learned to recognize, the one that meant she was about to be reminded of her place. His followers chuckled right on cue. Just run the diagnostic. Leave the thinking to the people who went to flight school. Heat rose in Rachel's cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "Of course, sir. I'll have the results on your desk by 1400. As Thompson and his entourage moved on, Rachel caught the whispered comment from one of the younger pilots. "Radar Rachel thinks she's a pilot now." More laughter followed them across the tarmac. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Rachel Martinez had graduated, top of her class from the Air Force Academy. She'd earned her pilot's wings with honors, logging more flight hours in training than most of them had in actual combat. She could have been flying any of those gleaming jets, could have been wearing the same smug expression Thompson wore like a badge. But that was before the incident, before the safety report that had ended her flying career and landed her behind a radar console instead of in a cockpit, before she'd learned that sometimes telling the truth was the fastest way to become invisible. Rachel returned to her screen, fingers dancing over the controls with practiced efficiency. The blip she'd been tracking appeared again, 5 contacts moving in perfect formation at the edge of radar range. No transponder signals, no flight plan on file. She'd been monitoring them for 3 days now, documenting their patterns, their timing, their increasingly aggressive approach vectors. She glanced toward the command tent where Thompson was holding court with the base commander, Colonel James Parker. Both men were laughing at something, probably another story about Thompson's latest conquest in the air or otherwise. The thought of interrupting their good mood with concerns from Radar Rachel made her stomach clench. Instead, she made another notation in her logbook, time-stamped and precise. 0847 hours. 5 unidentified contacts, bearing 090, altitude. Unknown, no IFF response, closing on base perimeter. The morning sun climbed higher, and the base settled into its routine. Pilots prepped for training flights, ground crews serviced the million-dollar jets, and Rachel Martinez watched the sky through electronic eyes, seeing threats that no one wanted to hear about. As she worked, she caught glimpses of her reflection. In the darkened console screen, a woman whose potential had been buried under bureaucracy and wounded egos. The face looking back at her was calm, professional, unremarkable. But behind her eyes burned the steady flame of someone who hadn't given up, who was simply waiting for the right moment. That moment was coming. She could feel it in the way the unknown contacts were tightening their pattern, in the increasing frequency of their appearances, in the cold certainty that had settled in her gut. Soon, very soon, the base would need more than polished jets and pretty pilots. It would need someone who knew how to see in the dark. 3 days later, Rachel was running her third consecutive diagnostic when she noticed the pattern had changed. The unknown contacts weren't just approaching the base's outer perimeter anymore. They were mapping it, learning it, preparing for something that made her blood run cold. She pulled up the tracking data from the past week, cross-referencing flight patterns with known training schedules. The mathematics were elegant and terrifying. Whoever was out there knew exactly when the base was most vulnerable, when the majority of their fighters would be on the ground refueling, when the radar sweeps had natural blind spots. "Martinez!" Thompson's voice boomed across the control room. He strode over to her station, coffee cup in hand, that familiar smirk plastered across his face. "Still seeing ghosts on your screen?" Several other technicians looked up from their stations. Rachel felt the familiar weight of unwanted attention, the kind that came with Thompson's public performances. "Sir, I've been tracking multiple contacts for over a week now. They're conducting what appears to be reconnaissance flights around our Jesus Christ, Martinez." Thompson laughed, shaking his head. "You know what your problem is? You think too much. These fancy computers got you jumping at shadows." He turned to address the room, voice carrying that tone he used when he wanted an audience. "Maybe we should get Martinez a desk job in accounting, somewhere she can't confuse weather patterns with enemy aircraft." The laughter that followed felt like needles under Rachel's skin. But it wasn't the mockery that bothered her. It was the dismissal. Every minute Thompson wasted grandstanding was another minute the real threat went unaddressed. "Sir," she tried again, keeping her voice level, "I have documentation going back 8 days. Flight patterns, approach vectors, timing sequences. If you just look at the data." "The data?" Thompson's smile turned sharp. "Martinez, let me explain something to you. I've got 2,000 flight hours and a master's degree from Harvard Business School. You've got, what, a 2-year tech degree and an overactive imagination." They leaned closer, voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Stay in your lane." As Thompson walked away, Rachel caught the eye of Sergeant First Class David Kim, one of the few people on base who'd ever treated her like more than animated furniture. David had been around long enough to remember when she'd first arrived, back when she still wore pilot's wings on her uniform before they'd been quietly removed and filed away with her dreams. David waited until Thompson was out of earshot before approaching her console. "The contacts are real, aren't they?" Rachel nodded, grateful for someone who actually listened. 5 aircraft flying in perfect formation. They've been probing our defenses, learning our patterns. "David, I think they're planning something." "What kind of aircraft?" "That's just it, I can't identify them." "They're fast. Faster than anything in our inventory. And they're running completely dark. No radio chatter, no transponders, nothing." She pulled up the latest tracking data. "Look at this approach vector. They're coming in from the southwest, using the mountain range to mask their approach until they're almost on top of us." David studied the screen, his expression growing more serious by the second. "Rachel, you need to document everything. Times, dates, flight paths, build a case they can't ignore." "I've been trying, but every time I bring it up, Thompson shuts me down. He's convinced I'm seeing things. Thompson's an ass, but he's not the only officer on this base. Colonel Parker's got a good head on his shoulders. If you can present him with solid evidence, you think he'll listen to me? I'm just a radar tech with a history of making waves." David was quiet for a moment. Rachel, I've known you for 3 years. I've seen you work, seen how you think. You don't make mistakes, and you don't panic. If you say there's a threat out there, I believe you. That evening, Rachel sat alone in the base library, surrounded by technical manuals and after-action reports. She'd been cross-referencing radar signatures with known aircraft profiles, looking for any clue about what she was seeing. The more she dug, the more convinced she became that whatever was out there wasn't in any manual she could find. Her secure phone buzzed with a text from her sister Emma back in Arizona. How's life in the desert? Still fixing broken radars and dodging jerks in flight suits? Rachel smiled despite herself. Emma was the only person who knew the whole story, how Rachel had been recruited straight out of the academy into an experimental test pilot program, how she discovered a critical flaw in a new fighter's design, how her report had been buried and her career quietly derailed to keep the program on schedule. Same old, she texted back. Though things might be getting interesting soon. Interesting how? The good kind or the kind that usually follows you around? Rachel stared at the screen, thinking about the contacts growing bolder each day, about Thompson's dismissive arrogance, about the cold certainty growing in her gut that something was coming. The kind that reminds you why you became a pilot in the first place. She finally replied. As she walked back to her quarters that night, Rachel looked up at the star-filled desert sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the range of her radar, 5 unknown aircraft were waiting, planning, preparing. The base slept on, confident in its technological superiority and the skill of its pilots. But Rachel Martinez knew better. She'd seen what happened when arrogance met reality, when politics trumped preparedness. The storm was coming, and when it hit, everyone would discover the difference between looking good and being ready. The only question was whether they'd figure it out in time. The emergency klaxon shattered the pre-dawn quiet like a physical blow. Rachel bolted upright in her bunk, instantly alert despite the early hour. She'd been expecting this dreading it, but expecting it nonetheless. By the time she reached the control center, chaos had already taken hold. Pilots were stumbling in half-dressed, coffee cups abandoned as they scrambled for flight gear. The massive display screens that usually showed routine training patterns now blazed with red warning indicators. "What's the situation?" Carl Parker's voice cut through the noise as he entered the room. Uniform hastily thrown on, but still commanding instant attention. Major Thompson stepped forward, his usual smugness replaced by barely controlled panic. "Sir, we've got multiple unidentified aircraft approaching from the southwest. They appeared on radar approximately 3 minutes ago, moving at high speed toward the base perimeter." Rachel felt her stomach drop. 3 minutes ago. She'd been tracking these contacts for over a week, had been trying to warn anyone who would listen. Now they were here, and the base was caught completely off guard. "How many aircraft?" Parker demanded. 5, sir. Formation flight, no IFF signals, no response to radio calls. Parker's gaze swept the room and landed on Rachel. "Sergeant Martinez, you're our radar specialist. What can you tell me about these contacts?" The room fell silent. Every eye turned to her, including Thompson's, which blazed with barely concealed fury. This was her moment, the chance to prove she'd been right all along. But looking at the faces around her, at the fear and confusion, she felt no satisfaction. "Sir, I've been tracking these aircraft for 8 days. They've been conducting systematic reconnaissance of our base, learning our patrol patterns, mapping our defensive positions." Her voice was steady, professional, despite the pounding of her heart. "Based on their flight characteristics, they're unlike any aircraft in our current threat assessment database." Thompson stepped forward, his face flushed. "Sir, with all due respect, Sergeant Martinez has been making these claims for days with no substantiation. Our intelligence reports show no hostile activity in this sector. The intelligence reports are wrong. Rachel's words hung in the air like a challenge. She pulled up her documentation on the main display, a week's worth of tracking data, pattern analysis, threat assessment. These aircraft have been probing our defenses systematically. They know our blind spots, our response times, our operational schedules. Colonel Parker studied the data, his expression growing more grim by the second. Jesus Christ. How did we miss this? Before anyone could answer, the base's air defense radar lit up with proximity warnings. The unknown aircraft had crossed into restricted airspace and were accelerating toward the base at impossible speeds. Scramble all available fighters, Parker ordered. I want everything we can get airborne in 5 minutes. The room exploded into action. Pilots sprinted for the flight line while ground crews rushed to prep aircraft. Through the windows, Rachel could see the sleek F-35s and F-22s being pushed out of hangars, their engines spinning up with urgent whines. Thompson was at the radio, now coordinating the response with the arrogance of someone who'd never faced a real threat. Alpha Flight, you're cleared for immediate launch. Beta Flight, stand by for secondary sweep. We'll have these jokers back across the border before breakfast. Rachel watched the radar display with growing dread. The unknown contacts weren't behaving like any aircraft she'd studied. They moved with fluid precision, their formation shifting and adapting in ways that suggested coordination beyond anything human pilots could achieve in real time. Sir, she called to Colonel Parker. I don't think conventional intercept tactics are going to work here. These aircraft are demonstrating capabilities far beyond. Martinez, Thompson's voice cracked like a whip. You've done enough damage for one morning. Let the actual pilots handle this. But as the first wave of base defenders reached intercept altitude, it became clear that Rachel's fears were justified. The unknown aircraft moved like shadows made solid, evading every attempt at engagement with maneuvers that defied physics and pilot endurance. Alpha led, I can't get a lock. These things are moving like nothing I've ever seen. Beta 2, I'm losing visual. They're just gone. The radio chatter grew increasingly desperate as pilot after pilot reported the same thing. The unknown aircraft were untouchable, playing with the base's finest fighters like cats with mice. Rachel watched the display, her mind racing through possibilities. Whatever was out there, it wasn't bound by the same limitations as human-piloted aircraft. The G-forces alone should have killed any human pilot attempting those maneuvers. We need to fall back and reassess, she said, stepping toward the command station. Our current fighters aren't equipped for this kind of engagement. Thompson wheeled on her, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. You don't get to speak here. This is your fault. All your crying wolf has everyone spooked and unfocused. My fault? Rachel's composure finally cracked. I've been trying to warn everyone for over a week. While you were playing politics and protecting your precious image, a real threat was gathering intelligence on this base. That's enough. Colonel Parker's voice cut through their argument like a blade. Both of you, stand down. We have bigger problems right now. On the display, the unknown aircraft had completed their demonstration. After embarrassing the base's entire fighter complement, they'd simply disappeared, vanishing from radar as mysteriously as they'd appeared. The control room fell silent, except for the hum of equipment and the labored breathing of people who'd just witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible. Thompson straightened his uniform, trying to salvage some dignity. Sir, I recommend we classify this incident and conduct a full investigation into how our intelligence networks missed. No. Colonel Parker's voice was quiet but final. We're not classifying anything. And we're sure as hell not pretending this didn't happen. His gaze found Rachel across the room. Sergeant Martinez, I owe you an apology. You tried to warn us, and we failed to listen. The admission hung in the air like a challenge to everything the base thought it knew about itself. Rachel felt no triumph in being right, only the cold certainty that whatever had just happened was only the beginning. As the room slowly emptied, she remained at her console, staring at the now quiet radar screen. The unknown aircraft had made their point with surgical precision. They could come and go as they pleased, and there wasn't a damn thing the base could do to stop them. But they'd also made a mistake. In demonstrating their capabilities so openly, they'd revealed that they were still bound by certain rules of engagement. They could have destroyed every fighter that challenged them, could have crippled the base entirely. Instead, they'd chosen to humiliate rather than annihilate. That suggested they wanted something, and that meant there might still be time to figure out what it was and how to stop them. Rachel pulled up her tracking data again, this time looking for patterns she might have missed. Somewhere in the static and shadows, answers were waiting. She just had to be smart enough to find them. In the hours following the morning's humiliation, Desert Mesa Air Base settled into an uneasy quiet. The brass had locked themselves in emergency briefings, while the pilots nursed wounded egos and tried to make sense of what they'd witnessed. Rachel found herself in an unexpected position. Suddenly, everyone wanted to hear from the radar, tech they'd been ignoring for months. She was deep in analysis when David Kim approached her station, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone with uncomfortable news. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting down one of the cups. "Also thought you should know Thompson's been making calls." Rachel looked up from her screens. "What kind of calls?" "The kind where he tries to pin this morning's disaster on faulty intelligence and equipment malfunctions. He's building a case that you've been filing false reports, trying to make yourself look important." A cold knot formed in Rachel's stomach. She'd seen this play before. Thompson was trying to get ahead of the narrative, to shift blame away from his own failures. "Let me guess. He's claiming I fabricated the tracking data. Worse, he's suggesting you might have psychological issues. Stress, paranoia, the kind of thing that gets you reassigned to a desk job in North Dakota." Rachel set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "David, I need you to do something for me. Can you access the backup radar logs from last week? The encrypted ones that require 2-person authorization? Those are the ones. I have a feeling Thompson's going to try to make my data disappear, and I need an independent record." David was quiet for a long moment. "Rachel, if I do this and they find out, we could both end up in serious trouble. And if we don't do it, the next time those aircraft show up, this base won't even have a warning." She turned to face him fully. "David, I know what I saw. I know what's coming. But if Thompson succeeds in discrediting me, everyone here is going to die not knowing what hit them." 20 minutes later, they were in a secure records room in the basement of the communications building. David's security clearance got them through the door, but what they found inside made both of them go very still. The backup radar logs for the past 2 weeks had been corrupted. Every file Rachel had been counting on as proof of her claims had been systematically destroyed, with only technical error messages left behind. "This isn't accidental," David said, studying the damaged files. "Someone with administrative access did this deliberately." Rachel felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. Thompson doesn't have that level of access. Someone higher up the chain is helping him. Before David could respond, they heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Moving quickly, they backed up what files they could recover onto an encrypted drive before slipping out through a side exit. That evening, Rachel sat alone in her quarters, staring at the handful of partial files they'd managed to salvage. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, to prove what she knew to be true. Thompson had outmaneuvered her, using connections she didn't know he had to erase the evidence of her warnings. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Parking lot behind the base exchange. 2,200 hours. Come along." Every instinct told her it was a trap, but she was running out of options. At 2,200 hours exactly, she walked to the designated meeting spot, hand resting on the service pistol at her hip. A figure stepped out of the shadows between two parked cars. Colonel Parker, looking older than she'd ever seen him. Sergeant Martinez. His voice was tired, worn down by a day of revelations and damage control. Thank you for coming. Sir, if this is about the missing radar logs, it's about a lot more than that. Parker gestured for her to walk with him toward the edge of the lot, away from any potential surveillance. Rachel, I'm going to tell you something that doesn't leave this conversation. Understood? She nodded, though her throat felt tight. 3 months ago, I received a classified briefing about potential new threats to our airspace. Aircraft using technology we don't fully understand, possibly not even technology we can currently match. He paused, looking out at the dark desert. I was told to watch for unusual radar contacts and to report them immediately through secure channels. You knew? The words came out sharper than she'd intended. You knew what I was seeing, and you let Thompson shut me down anyway? I didn't. No, it was the same thing. Your reports were being filtered through Thompson before they reached me, and he was editing them, removing the details that would have triggered the protocols I'd been given. The full scope of Thompson's sabotage hit her like a physical blow. He's been covering up a potential national security threat to protect his own career. It's worse than that. Thompson has connections in the Pentagon, people who have a vested interest in certain defense contracts moving forward on schedule. If reports of unknown advanced aircraft started circulating, it could jeopardize billions of dollars in weapons systems that might suddenly be obsolete. Rachel felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This wasn't just about one arrogant pilot. It was about a web of interests that reached far beyond Desert Mesa Air Base. Sir, what happens now? Parker was quiet for a long moment. Officially? I'm launching a full investigation into intelligence failures and communication breakdowns. Thompson's going to be transferred to a desk job pending review. And unofficially? Unofficially, I need someone I can trust watching those radar screens. Someone who won't let politics override reality. He met her eyes in the darkness. Rachel, I know about your background. I know why you ended up as a radar tech instead of a pilot. But I also know you're the most competent person on this base when it comes to identifying threats. What are you asking me to do? Keep watching. Keep documenting. And next time those aircraft show up, because we both know they will, I want you to have options ready that don't depend on conventional fighters. As Colonel Parker walked back toward the base, Rachel stood alone under the desert stars, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a familiar coat. The game had changed, but she was still playing it from the shadows. Somewhere out there in the darkness, unknown aircraft were preparing for their next move. And somewhere in the classified files she wasn't supposed to know about, there might be answers to questions she was only beginning to understand. But first, she had to survive Thompson's final attempt to destroy her career. Because if she was right about what was coming, the base would need her more than it had ever needed its golden boy pilots. The war for Desert Mesa's future was just beginning. The next morning brought news that made Rachel's blood run cold. Major Thompson had been promoted to acting squadron commander while Colonel Parker was on temporary leave pending investigation. The official story was vague, but the message was clear. Thompson's Pentagon connections had given him enough leverage to survive the previous day's disaster. Rachel was reviewing overnight radar logs when Airman First Class Jessica Turner approached her station. Turner was young, fresh out of technical training, but she had sharp eyes and a willingness to ask uncomfortable questions that reminded Rachel of herself at that age. Sergeant Martinez, Turner said quietly, I think you should see this. She handed Rachel a printout of maintenance schedules. At first glance, it looked routine standard servicing for the base's fighter aircraft. But as Rachel studied the details, a pattern emerged that made her stomach clench. Every single F-35 and F-22 is scheduled for routine maintenance, starting tomorrow, Rachel said. All of them at the same time. That's what caught my attention. I've never seen a maintenance schedule that would ground our entire frontline fighter force simultaneously. Rachel felt pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. Turner, who authorized this schedule? Major Thompson, sir. He'd pushed it through this morning, claiming it was a new efficiency initiative from Pentagon Budget Office. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Thompson was ensuring that when the unknown aircraft returned, and Rachel was certain they would, the base would be defenseless. No doubt he had a plausible explanation ready, something about streamlining operations and reducing costs. Turner, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to understand that your career might depend on following my instructions exactly. The younger woman's face went serious. What do you need? There's an old F-16 in Hangar C. It's officially listed as a training airframe, too old for frontline service. I need you to find out its actual status. Is it flyable or just a static display? Ma'am, that aircraft hasn't been touched in months. Why would you? Turner stopped, understanding dawning in her eyes. You think they're coming back. I know they're coming back. And when they do, that F-16 might be the only thing standing between this base and complete humiliation. Or worse. While Turner went to investigate the F-16's status, Rachel threw herself into analyzing every scrap of data she could access about the unknown aircraft. Working through her lunch break and into the afternoon, she built a comprehensive threat assessment that painted a terrifying picture. The aircraft weren't just advanced, they were revolutionary. Their speed, maneuverability, and stealth capabilities suggested technology decades ahead of anything in the current U.S. inventory. But more troubling was their behavior pattern. Each encounter had been precisely calibrated to demonstrate superiority, without causing actual damage. Someone was sending a message, and Rachel was beginning to understand what it might be. Her analysis was interrupted by the arrival of David Kim, who looked like he'd been running. Rachel, we have a problem. I just heard from a friend in communications. There's been chatter about transferring you off base, effective immediately. On whose authority? Thompson's. He's claiming you're a security risk, that your psychological instability makes you unsuitable for sensitive assignments. Rachel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course he is. Can't have inconvenient radar techs around when you're planning to leave the base defenseless. Turner returned at that moment, slightly out of breath, but with information that made Rachel's pulse quicken. The F-16 is flyable, she reported. Barely. It's been maintained at minimal levels, but the engines are operational and the flight systems are functional. There's just one problem. What's that? It's locked down under Major Thompson's direct authority. No one can access it without his personal authorization. Rachel stared at the printout Turner handed her, seeing Thompson's signature at the bottom of a custody form that effectively put the only potentially available aircraft off limits. He'd thought of everything, almost everything. Turner, what's the security protocol for accessing aircraft during a base-wide emergency? Emergency protocols override individual custody orders, but it would have to be a declared emergency. Not just. She stopped, understanding flickering in her eyes. Ma'am, what are you planning? Before Rachel could answer, the air raid sirens began to wail. The sound cut through the afternoon heat like a blade, sending personnel scrambling for emergency stations. Through the windows of the control room, Rachel could see the radar displays lighting up with contact warnings. They were back. But this time, there were more of them. Much more. Jesus Christ, David breathed, staring at the main display. How many are there? Rachel counted quickly, her training taking over despite the fear clawing at her chest. 15 contacts. 3 formations of 5, approaching from different vectors. The base's emergency response kicked in with practiced efficiency, but Rachel could see the fatal flaw immediately. With all the frontline fighters grounded for maintenance, there was nothing to scramble. The few older training aircraft available weren't equipped for intercept operations. Major Thompson's voice crackled over the emergency communication system. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. He sounded confident, controlled, like a man following a script he'd rehearsed, which, Rachel realized, he probably had. "Turner," she said quietly, "that emergency protocol you mentioned, it's in effect now, isn't it?" The younger woman nodded. Slowly, "Yes, ma'am. During a declared emergency, any qualified pilot can access available aircraft for base defense purposes." Rachel felt something shift inside her, a cold certainty settling into place. For 3 years, she'd been the invisible radar tech, the woman whose warnings were dismissed and whose expertise was overlooked. But before that, she'd been something else entirely. She'd been one of the best pilots the Air Force had ever trained. "David, Turner, I need you both to listen carefully. In about 10 minutes, Major Thompson is going to discover that his carefully orchestrated trap has one flaw he didn't account for." "What's that?" David asked. Rachel was already moving toward the door, her steps quick and purposeful. "He assumed I'd forgotten how to fly." As she strode across the tarmac toward Hangar C, Rachel felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. The electric anticipation of a pilot about to take to the sky. Behind her, the base scrambled to respond to a threat it couldn't match with conventional tactics. Ahead of her waited an old F-16, neglected and underestimated, much like its soon-to-be pilot. It was time to remind everyone why she'd earned her wings in the first place. Hangar C felt like a tomb when Rachel entered it, the afternoon heat pressing down through the metal roof despite the shadows inside. The F-16 sat exactly where Turner had described it, looking abandoned among stacks of spare parts and forgotten equipment. Its paint was faded, its surfaces marked with the honest wear of an aircraft that had served long and faithfully before being cast aside for newer, shinier models. Rachel approached it with the reverence of someone greeting an old friend. Her hands traced the worn surfaces as she conducted a rapid pre-flight inspection, muscle memory guiding her through checks she hadn't performed in 3 years. The aircraft was old, yes, but it had been maintained well enough to fly. More importantly, it had something the newer fighters lacked: simplicity. No complex computer systems that could be jammed or confused. Just a pilot, a machine, and the eternal dance between them. "Sergeant Martinez." The voice cracked across the hangar like a whip. Major Thompson stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 security personnel, his face twisted with fury. "Step away from that aircraft immediately." Rachel didn't look up from her inspection. "Sorry, sir. Emergency protocols are in effect. I'm accessing this aircraft for base defense purposes. You are not authorized to fly. Your pilot status was revoked 3 years ago following your psychological evaluation." Now she did look up, meeting his gaze with steady eyes. "My pilot certification was suspended pending review, not revoked. The review was never completed because certain interested parties preferred to keep me grounded." She resumed her inspection. "But emergency protocols override administrative suspensions." Thompson stepped forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "If you touch that aircraft, I will have you court-martialed for theft of military property, insubordination, and whatever other charges I can make stick. Sir, with respect, you should be more concerned about the 15 unidentified aircraft currently approaching this base than about one radar tech who remembers how to fly." Rachel's voice remained calm, professional, even as her heart pounded. Unless, of course, you have some reason to want our defenses to fail completely. The accusation hung in the air between them like a drawn blade. Thompson's face went white, then red, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he said finally. "This is bigger than you, bigger than this base. There are agreements in place, understandings." "Understandings?" Rachel straightened, her voice cutting through his words. "Is that what you call selling out your own people? Because that's what this is, isn't it? You've known all along what those aircraft are, and you've been helping them." Before Thompson could respond, Colonel Parker's voice echoed through the hangar. "Major Thompson, step away from Sergeant Martinez immediately." Parker entered the hangar with Turner and several other base personnel behind him. His face was grim but determined, and Rachel could see the weight of command decisions in his bearing. "Sir," Thompson began, "I'm preventing an unauthorized—" "You're relieved." "Of duty, Major. Effective immediately." Parker's voice was quiet but final. "Security, please escort Major Thompson to the detention facility, pending a full investigation." As Thompson was led away, still protesting his innocence, Parker approached Rachel. "Sergeant, I need to know. Can you fly this aircraft?" "Yes, sir." "Can you engage multiple hostiles in an aircraft 40 years older than anything they're flying?" Rachel was quiet for a moment, thinking about the question seriously. The F-16 was indeed ancient by modern standards, but it had advantages the newer aircraft lacked. It was analog where they were digital, simple where they were complex, and most importantly, it could be flown by instinct and experience rather than computer assistance. "Sir, I can try, but I need you to understand something. If I take this bird up, there's a good chance I won't be coming back." These aircraft we're facing, they're not bound by the same physical laws that limit human pilots. I know. I've seen the classified briefings. Parker's expression was grave. "But you're our only option. Every other fighter on base is grounded, and those contacts are getting closer every minute." Rachel nodded, understanding the weight of what he was asking. "Then let's get this bird ready to fly." The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of activity. Turner and several maintenance crew members worked to prep the F-16 while Rachel suited up in borrowed flight gear. The old helmet felt strange after 3 years, but the familiar weight of it was oddly comforting. As she ran through final systems checks, David Kim appeared at the side of the cockpit. "Rachel, I pulled everything I could from the backup files before they were completely wiped. The tracking data shows these aircraft have one consistent pattern. They always break off when they encounter unexpected resistance." "Meaning?" "Meaning they're not here to destroy us. They're here to prove they can. But if someone actually fights back effectively, they retreat and reassess." Rachel absorbed this information, filing it away with everything else she knew about the enemy aircraft. It suggested they weren't facing an all-out attack, but rather a demonstration of power. The question was, what happened when the demonstration was over? "Rachel!" Colonel Parker's voice came through her headset as she prepared for engine start. "I want you to know whatever happens up there, you've already done more for this base than anyone has a right to ask." "Thank you, sir. But let's save the eulogies until we see how this plays out." The F-16's engine caught with a roar that seemed to shake the entire hangar. Rachel felt the familiar vibration through her seat, the steady pulse of a machine built for one purpose: to fly and fight. As she taxied out toward the runway, she could see base personnel gathered at windows and doorways, watching the lone fighter roll toward its impossible mission. The radio crackled with updates from the control tower. Unknown aircraft now within 10 miles of base perimeter. All personnel to secure positions. Rachel reached the runway and paused, looking up at the clear desert sky that would soon be filled with aircraft decades ahead of anything she was flying. For just a moment, she allowed herself to remember the young woman who had dreamed of moments like this, not the circumstances, perhaps, but the chance to prove herself in the ultimate test of skill and courage. Tower, this is Guardian 1. Requesting immediate takeoff clearance. Guard GM1, you are cleared for takeoff. Give them hell, Rachel. She pushed the throttle forward and felt the familiar surge of acceleration as the F-16 leaped down the runway. The nose lifted, the ground fell away, and suddenly she was flying again for the first time in 3 years. The sensation was like coming home after a long exile. Below her, Desert Mesa Air Base spread out in orderly geometric patterns. Above her, somewhere in the bright desert sky, 15 unknown aircraft were converging on the only thing standing between them and total air superiority. Rachel climbed steadily, her mind already shifting into the focused calm of combat. She'd trained for this moment her entire career, even if she'd never imagined it would come in quite this way. The old VIF-16 responded to her like a faithful horse, every control input translated into smooth, precise movement. At 15,000 feet, she finally saw them. They appeared as dark specks against the sun, moving in formation so tight and precise they looked like they were connected by invisible wires. As they drew closer, Rachel could make out their angular shapes, all sharp edges and impossible curves that seemed to bend light around them. Guardian 1, we have visual on the unknown aircraft, she reported. 15 contacts in 3 formations, approaching from multiple vectors. Copy, Guardian 1. Engage at your discretion. Rachel took a deep breath and selected her first target, the lead aircraft of the center formation. It was time to find out just how advanced these mysterious visitors really were, and whether an old fighter flown by a disgraced pilot could give them the surprise of their lives. The first engagement lasted exactly 37 seconds. Rachel dove toward the lead formation, the F-16 screaming through the thin air at maximum velocity. She lined up on the lead aircraft, achieved missile lock, and fired. The AIM-9 Sidewinder streaked away from her aircraft, its heat-seeking warhead tracking true toward the target. The unknown aircraft simply wasn't there anymore. One moment, Rachel had a solid lock on a target moving in a straight line. The next, her missile was chasing empty air while the enemy fighter materialized 2 miles to her left, having somehow translated its position without any visible transition. What the hell? She breathed, then keyed her radio. Tower, Guardian 1. The targets are demonstrating capability beyond anything in our threat assessment. Guardian 1, please clarify. They can teleport, sir. I don't know how else to explain it. The 3 formations had reorganized during her attack run, and now they were coming for her. Rachel pulled into a hard climbing turn, G-forces pressing her deep into her seat as she fought for altitude advantage. The old F-16 groaned under the stress but held together, its analog systems unaffected by whatever technology was scrambling. The radar signatures of her opponents. The first enemy aircraft appeared in her peripheral vision, closing impossibly fast. Rachel snap-rolled left and dove, using gravity to build speed as she plunged toward the desert floor. Behind her, the unknown fighter followed, but she noticed something crucial. It was following predictable physics now, having to actually maneuver rather than simply appearing where it wanted to be. Tower, Guardian 1. I think their teleportation ability has limitations. They can't use it during active maneuvering. Copy, Guardian 1. Can you exploit that? Rachel pulled out of her dive barely 1,000 feet above the ground, the rocky terrain flashing past her canopy in a blur of brown and red. Working on it. She turned toward the mountain range that bordered the base, flying low and fast through the canyons she'd memorized during countless hours in the simulator. The enemy aircraft followed, But now they were in her element, flying by instinct and terrain knowledge through passages too narrow for their advanced maneuvers. The lead pursuer tried to cut her off by anticipating her route, but Rachel knew these canyons better than anyone. She pulled into a knife-edge pass between two rock formations, rolled inverted, and came out directly behind her pursuer. This time, when she fired, the missile found its mark. The enemy aircraft erupted in a ball of flame and debris that scattered across the canyon floor. Rachel felt a surge of fierce satisfaction. They could be killed. Guardian 1. Splash 1 banded. Repeat. Splash 1. The celebration was short-lived. The remaining 14 aircraft abandoned all pretense of conventional tactics and came for her with coordinated fury. They moved like a flock of predatory birds, appearing and disappearing in formations that defied both physics and logic. Rachel dove back toward the deck, skimming the desert floor at barely 100 feet of altitude. The enemy fighters followed, but their advanced capabilities were hampering them now. They couldn't risk their teleportation technology at such low altitude with so little margin for error. She led them on a high-speed chase across the desert, using every terrain feature and navigation trick she'd learned in 20 years of flying. When they climbed, she went lower. When they spread out to flank her, she turned into the most aggressive fighter and forced a one-on-one engagement. The second kill came when she baited an enemy pilot into a head-on attack, then used the F-16's superior low-speed handling to force an overshoot. As the enemy fighter flashed past her canopy, she snap-rolled behind it and fired her remaining missiles in a rapid salvo. 2 hits. Another enemy aircraft spinning toward the ground in flames. But now she was out of missiles, and 13 enemy fighters were still hunting her. Guardian 1. Be advised, enemy aircraft are withdrawing from the base perimeter. Rachel looked at her tactical display and felt a chill run down her spine. The enemy formations were indeed pulling back from the base, but they weren't retreating. They were consolidating, forming a single massive formation with her as the focal point. Tower, I think they're done playing games. The 13 remaining aircraft arranged themselves in a perfect sphere around her position, each one maintaining precise distance and position relative to the others. It was a formation unlike anything in any tactical manual. Beautiful, deadly, and completely inescapable. Rachel found herself at the center of a 3-dimensional cage made of aircraft that could appear and disappear at will. No matter which direction she turned, she faced multiple enemies. No matter how she maneuvered, they matched her movements with mathematical precision. For the first time since taking off, she felt the cold touch of real fear. Guardian 1. Status report. Rachel looked around at the ring of enemy fighters, their dark shapes stark against the afternoon sky. She thought about Major Thompson's betrayal, about Colonel Parker's faith in her, about all the pilots on the ground who were depending on her to find a solution they couldn't see. Tower, Guardian 1. I'm about to try something that's either very clever or very stupid. Guardian 1, please clarify. Rachel pushed the F-16's throttle to maximum power and pointed the nose straight up, climbing directly toward the center of the enemy formation above her. I'm going to find out what happens when you ram an aircraft that can teleport. Guardian 1 negative. Do not engage in suicide tactics. But Rachel was already committed. The F-16 streaked upward, its engine screaming at maximum power, climbing directly toward the enemy aircraft that held the highest position in the formation. The enemy pilot had 2 choices: teleport away and break the formation, or maintain position and risk collision. At the last possible second, the enemy fighter vanished. And in that instant of confusion, Rachel rolled inverted and dove straight down to the gap it had left, escaping the trap at the cost of everything the old F-16 had left to give. The engine was redlining. The airframe was stressed beyond its design limits. But she was free, and the enemy formation was in chaos behind her. Guardian 1 to tower. I'm coming home. Looking back at the scattered enemy aircraft, Rachel realized they were already withdrawing, their demonstration complete. They'd proven they could own the sky whenever they chose. But they'd also learned that even obsolete aircraft could be dangerous in the right hands. It wasn't a victory, exactly. But it wasn't a defeat either. And sometimes that was enough. 3 weeks later, Rachel Martinez sat in a conference room in the Pentagon, facing a panel of generals whose expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. The official debriefing had lasted 6 hours, covering every detail of her engagement with the unknown aircraft. Now came the part she'd been dreading, the questions about Major Thompson's role in compromising base security. Sergeant Martinez. General Patricia Hayes leaned forward, her voice carefully neutral. You're alleging that Major Thompson deliberately sabotaged base defenses to facilitate an attack by unknown aircraft. That's an extraordinary claim. Yes, ma'am. I have extraordinary evidence to support it. Rachel activated the tablet in front of her, displaying the data that David Kim and Jessica Turner had painstakingly reconstructed from corrupted files and backup systems. Major Thompson had advanced knowledge of the aircraft capabilities. He systematically suppressed my reports, grounded all effective defensive aircraft under false pretenses, and attempted to discredit me when I persisted in raising the alarm. General Marcus Webb, a man whose chest displayed enough ribbons to outfit a small parade, shook his head. Even if we accept your technical analysis, Sergeant, you're asking us to believe that a decorated officer would commit treason for what? Money? Ideology? For career advancement, sir. Major Thompson was being fast-tracked for promotion by defense. Contractors who had a vested interest in preventing reports of advanced aircraft from becoming public knowledge. Such reports would have threatened multi-billion-dollar programs that might suddenly be obsolete. The generals exchanged glances, loaded with meaning Rachel couldn't decipher. Finally, General Hayes spoke again. Sergeant Martinez, your actions during the engagement were remarkable. Against impossible odds, flying an aircraft that should have been retired years ago, you managed to destroy 2 enemy fighters and force the withdrawal of the remaining. Force. Thank you, ma'am. However, General Webb continued, the aircraft you engaged have never been officially acknowledged to exist. As far as the record is concerned, you conducted a training exercise that went wrong, resulting in the loss of 2 drone aircraft due to equipment malfunction. Rachel felt something cold settle in her stomach. Sir, are you telling me that the attack on Desert Mesa is being classified? We're telling you that certain national security interests require a careful approach to these events. General Hayes' voice carried the weight of finality. Major Thompson has been quietly transferred to a position where he can do no further harm. The security breaches at Desert Mesa have been addressed. And you double K paused, consulting a file in front of her. You're being offered several options, Sergeant. You can accept a promotion to technical sergeant and a transfer to a research position where your analytical skills would be highly valued. You can return to Desert Mesa with a commendation and continue your current duties. Or you can accept a full reinstatement of your pilot status, effective immediately, with assignment to a classified program that deals with unconventional threats. Rachel sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune. 3 weeks ago, she'd been an invisible radar tech facing court-martial. Now she was being offered her wings back. What kind of classified program? General Webb smiled for the first time during the meeting. The kind that hunts things that officially don't exist, using aircraft that officially were never built, flown by pilots who officially aren't there. 2 months later, Rachel stood on the flight line at Groom Lake, looking up at an aircraft that made her heart race with pure excitement. It was sleek and angular, its surfaces covered in materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The designation stenciled on its side read X-47E, but the crew called it something else entirely. Beautiful, isn't she? Colonel Parker walked up beside her, wearing the same expression of wonder. He'd been transferred to the program along with David Kim, Jessica Turner, and several other Desert Mesa personnel who'd proven they could see past the official story to the truth underneath. "She's perfect," Rachel said, running her hand along the aircraft's smooth flank. "How fast?" "Classified." "How high?" "Classified." "How far?" "Also classified. But I can tell you this, when those mystery aircraft show up again, and they will, we'll be ready for them." Rachel nodded, thinking about the enemy fighters that had disappeared into the desert sky, their demonstration complete but their intentions still unknown. Somewhere out there in facilities hidden from satellite surveillance and congressional oversight, unknown pilots were preparing for the next encounter. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it filled her with anticipation. She'd spent 3 years in exile, watching the sky through electronic eyes, while others dismissed her warnings and questioned her competence. Now she was back where she belonged, not behind a radar console, but in the cockpit of the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built. "When do we start training?" she asked. Colonel Parker grinned. "How about now?" As Rachel climbed into the X-47E's cockpit, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The humiliation, the isolation, the moment when she'd been forced to prove herself an obsolete fighter against impossible odds. All of it had led to this a second chance to be the pilot she'd always known she could be. The canopy closed, with a soft hiss sealing her into the aircraft's advanced environment. Systems came online around her with barely a whisper, displaying information in ways that seemed almost telepathic in their intuitive clarity. "Tower, this is Ghost 1 requesting permission for initial checkout flight." "Ghost 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Welcome back to the sky, Rachel." The X-47E lifted off with silent grace, its engines producing thrust without the roar she'd expected. As she climbed into the Nevada sky, Rachel felt the weight of 3 lost years falling away behind her. She'd been invisible for so long that people had forgotten she existed. Now she was invisible by design, a ghost in a machine that officially wasn't there. It was, she reflected as the aircraft climbed toward the stratosphere, exactly where she wanted to be. Below her, the desert stretched away in all directions, hiding secrets and preparing for the next chapter of a conflict that most people would never know was being fought on their behalf. Rachel Martinez had found her place in that hidden war, and she was ready for whatever came next. In the distance, thunder rolled across the clear sky, the sound of other ghosts taking to the air, preparing for battles that would never make the news but would determine the future of the world. The quiet hangar tech who had saved her base with an obsolete fighter was gone forever. In her place flew a guardian angel with classified wings, watching over a sleeping nation that would never name. And that was exactly how she wanted it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.